Hello and welcome to today's webinar on how and when to register EU medical devices and report UDI information to UDAMED. Folks, I know this is a hot topic and I am really looking forward to today's presentation by Gary Sainer from RETEC. My name is John Spear and I'm the founder and VP of Quality and Regulatory here at Greenlight Guru, and I will be the moderator for today's event. As I mentioned, we got a really special presentation scheduled for you today. I know our presenter, Gary Sainer, is really looking forward to sharing his expertise on registering your EU medical device and reporting UDI information to UDAMED. And from past experiences, folks, I can tell you that there's none better in this industry at understanding how to navigate and deal with UDI than RETEC. So we've got the cream of the crop, the best of the best for you today. Before we dive too deep into today's presentation and introduce our presenter and his company, RETEC, I'm going to touch on a few items real quick. Yes, the most common question we always get in every webinar is this recorded and will you send me the slides? Yes, 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 of course. Every webinar we ever do is always recorded. It's always available on demand. And if you sign up, and like many of you, or all of you today, you will get a replay after today's presentation with the slides. So yes, they're coming. And I know some of you will still ask that, and we'll address that at the end too. But the webinar is going to run for about 60 minutes, and we'll include a Q&A session at the end where Gary has offered time to answer many of the questions that come in. So I would encourage you throughout the presentation today to submit your questions as they come up in the box on the right-hand side of the GoToWebinar panel, and we will get to as many of them as time permits. I'd also like to share a few words about Greenlight Guru and why we put on these free training sessions. If you've ever been on one of the Greenlight Guru training sessions before, then you know that we put these on because improving the quality of life is our mission here at Greenlight Guru. And it's likely a mission that's similar to many of you who are participating on today's webinar. Anything that we can do as an organization that helps device makers bring safer, life-changing devices to market quicker and with less risk aligns with that mission. We're constantly looking for ways to fulfill that mission, whether it's through hosting these free training sessions, through partnering with world-class medical device consultants and firms like Gary Sainer and RETEC, or through our award-winning medical device QMS software. If you'd like to learn more about why medical device companies all over the globe are moving away from paper-based, digital paper, general purpose quality management systems and adopting the purpose-built medical device quality management system that we have at Greenlight Guru, then I would encourage you to go to www.greenlight.guru after today's presentation to schedule your free personalized demo. In doing so, you'll learn how the very best medical device companies are leveraging the industry-specific purpose-built quality management software to gain ISO 13485 certification, market approval and clearances, breeze through audits, and push beyond just compliance to produce true quality medical devices. So again, if you're interested in learning how we can help your medical device company, be sure to go to www.greenlight.guru after today's webinar and schedule your personalized demo. All right, let me move on to today's presentation and let me give a proper overview of an introduction to RETEC and specifically Gary Sainer. So Gary is a subject matter expert on unique device identification and other structured content reporting to regulatory agencies and commercial organizations. He has over 30 years of experience in software development, process management, and data administration, with the last 15 years focused on the life sciences industry. On the screen, you can learn a little bit more about RETEC. I know that they've been a huge advocate and resource for UDI for many, many years, going back a few years ago to the FDA UDI initiative. And Gary has been through this many, many times before. So definitely have, as I mentioned, an expert doing today's presentation. With an understanding of these regulations, the business requirements and systems, Gary has helped shape and implement solutions at RETEC for data management, validation, and processing of drug labeling and medical device, unique device identification content. Gary serves as the co-chair of the industry's structured product labeling technical team and is on the advisory board of the medical devices group. So without further ado, let me hand things over to today's presenter, Gary Sainer.
John, thank you very much for that introduction and the invitation to share some of the information that we have on UDI, specifically the European Union initiative along the UDI lines. And we're just thrilled to share some of that information with the audience and being able to work with you in sharing that information. And thank you again for that opportunity. We'll get started here. Taking a look at the speakers here, you know John and Gary. I'm going to have to work on my hairstyle to get caught up with John. It looks like a little bit of good hairstyle going along there. All right, so the topics for today, we're going to start off with an evaluation and review, kind of a recap of the regulation. I know many in the audience probably are familiar, and in some cases very familiar with the regulations, but there's hundreds on the audience right now, and we would like to make sure everyone's up to speed so that they understand the conversation going forward and some of the requirements. We'll do a recap and also move then into the European Union device registration and reporting. We'll spend most of the time on that particular topic and the surrounding data that needs to be pulled together, collected, and submitted to UDAMED. As John mentioned, we'll keep a little bit of time at the end for the Q&A. And with all that, I'd like to get started. And first of all, mention, before we focus in on the European Union, I want to make sure that the audience is aware of the initiatives around the globe. There's many regulatory bodies that are trending toward implementing UDI, and they have some pretty tight timelines. If you take a look at some of the things going on in recent years, starting with the US in 2014, and now we're on the verge of EU regulations coming into force in 2020. There's actually some implant registration taking place in Netherlands. They do have a repository that is collecting that information. But this next wave, Australia, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, and China, they have put forth public documents, specifications, guidelines, and I consider this the next wave of UDI regulations that we need to keep a very close look at. Australia has some indications that they will be about a year after the implementation of in the European Union. Saudi Arabia has specs out. Looks like they'll have a pilot program starting second half of this year. South Korea is again in the middle of evaluating their specifications and pilot. China has a pilot active at this point. And again, second half of the year, firming up the regulations and making sure UDI appears on their products. So this is the next wave, folks. Australia, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, and China. And then after that, it just goes around the world. Many of these companies or countries, Argentina, Brazil, Canada, India, and so on, are moving forward. One thing that we have seen is almost all the major regulatory bodies have or will in the near future adopt UDI standards. The point is that when you think about European Union and meeting that regulation, that this is not a single point solution that needs to be taken care of, and maybe you actually pursued that particular approach with the FDA, but now you're starting to see with the EU and these other agencies coming into play that you might want to reevaluate and have a system that is able to expand and cover many different types of regulatory bodies. If we look in the short term, there's a number of deadlines on this particular timeline, but today we'll be talking about the European Union Medical Device Regulation and its date of application in May 26. But don't forget, later next year in September, there's the final wave of the US FDA Class 1 devices that's significant. And for those companies that only manufacture Class 1s, is a pretty steep learning curve to get up to speed and make those submissions. So that is another to-do item on your list. With this point, John, I'd like to have you launch a poll question so that we can explore in what countries do you market your medical devices. And I think that's be good data to have available, if you don't mind launching at this point.
Absolutely, folks. So take a moment. In what countries do you market your medical devices? Check all that apply. I'll let this roll for a few seconds here. Responses are coming in quickly. If only election results could happen this fast. All right, so we've got about 3/4 of the folks that have chimed in. So let's close that and let me share the results. So Gary, I don't know if you can see this on your screen, but just in case you cannot, USA 90%, EU 94%, Australia 58%, Saudi Arabia 46%, South Korea 37%.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you for running that poll. It's very significant and timely then for us to review the EU regulations and the game plan. It looks like many of the audience are already marketing into the EU, so that is wonderful feedback. With that, I'm going to switch over to a recap of the regulations. Just what are these regulations that are driving this all this activity? There were recent incidences that highlighted the weakness in the current framework in the European Union. There was a desire to establish some new rules, and what we have seen is that the existing framework that was based on European Union directives, a medical device directive, an active implantable medical device directive, and an in vitro diagnostic directive. Those three directives are now replaced by two regulations, a medical device regulation pulling the medical devices and active implantables together, and then again a standalone regulation for the in vitro diagnostic devices. Significant with this activity back in 2017 was the fact that these were rolled out as regulations, which means that they're legally binding across all the member states in the EU. Whereas before, the directives were implemented with varying levels of uniformity. So the good news is now there's uniformity. The bad news is that it's a completely new framework. The framework has a lot of changes on the regulations, how you need to certify a device, so there's actually no grandfathering, and all the devices need to be recertified to the medical device regulation. There's new rules for notified bodies, and in some cases, devices have been given a higher risk class, and a lot of clinical investigations need to go on and so on. We won't go into that. I put some information here about changes to the medical device label. You might want to look into the electronic instruction for use, a URL that's able to be placed on MDR, and a medical device symbol, MD, and obviously the UDI that we'll be discussing today. Our friends over at Prism ID created this draft like sample label, and I thought I'd include it just to highlight that UDI is now presented in this particular sample in both human readable plain text and also automatic identification data capture. So you might see or hear that referred to as AIDC, and that's typically pointing to or referring to a one-dimensional barcode or a two-dimensional barcode. If we take a look at the timeline of these regulations, there's two very important dates referred to as the date of application. So May 26, 2020, that's right around the corner, less than a year away, where these regulations come into place for medical devices. And then 2 years thereafter, in 2022, for the in vitro diagnostics. And much of the regulations are similar. If you compare documents side by side, there's a lot of items that are same. Actually, verbiage is the same in some cases, but there are some nuances, and just be aware that if you have an in vitro diagnostic on the market, there are some subtle differences. With that recap, I want to move over to our discussion now where we talk a little bit more in detail about registering devices and reporting UDI data. Now, you'll find in the regulation that these particular topics have references in the Annex, Annex 6, Part A and B, that describe these particular attributes surrounding the registering of a device and reporting core data elements. It has come out in the Medical Device Collaboration Group that these two data values, these sets of data, will be linked together, and it only makes sense that they be submitted together. So I might mention the register a device or report UDI, but you should understand that the submission thereof is expected to be a single event with all the data coming in a concatenated fashion. To start our discussion, we need to look at three different groups of your product portfolio. You might have some products that are currently certified, you're currently placing them on the market under the directive. So for this example, a medical device directive, but for whatever reason, as of the date of application, May 26, 2020, you elect not to continue with those devices, and you're basically pulling them off the market. The good news is that there is very little, well, I'll talk about one, implications for those devices going forward after the date of application. So none of the requirements for UDI or whatever would apply, but in the event those devices which are now out in the field and being used by customers, in the event there is a serious incident, you would need to report that into the new UDAMED. And in the course of doing that, there's a prerequisite that you identify those MDD devices, and as a result, you will need to register those devices and make the serious incident report. That is the only time that they need to be reported and registered in that particular scenario. So if there's no serious event for that class, there's no reason to make a submission and register that device into the new UDAMED. The second category is your devices that you currently market under a directive, and they have a current certificate. It doesn't expire right away as of May 26, 2020, and you intend to go ahead and continue market that product in Europe. And you want to continue to place that on the marketplace and have it be put into service. In this particular instance, the regulations do allow that up to a period of time, and we'll get into the details shortly. But there are some criteria that must be met to continue to market those legacy devices after the date of application. The third major category are those new devices that come onto the market for the first time after the date of application. They would not be able to follow and be placed on market under a certificate, under a directive. They would have to be placed on the market with a medical device regulation certificate. So they need to follow all the rules in the regulation. So let's work our way through first of all, the legacy directive devices. The criteria for a legacy device is that it has a valid directive certificate and it complies with the requirements in an ongoing fashion during the course of the period of time. And noteworthy is that it has no significant changes affecting the design, safety, or effectiveness. So this is basically a design that's frozen. Now, if there's a serious upgrade or a version change, and that would cause a revised certificate to normally take place under the directive, then this particular product falls out of the legacy provision and would then have to be evaluated and approved under medical device regulation. These legacy devices must have the device registered along with the UDI data in UDAMED within 18 months after the date of application. So we'll take a look at this on a timeline on a graph here and help explain that. The other caveat is that in the event there's a serious incident or a field safety notice or a field safety corrective action, then that serious incident needs to be reported, and depending on the severity, as you know, it might be 2 days or up to 10 days per the regulations. And there is a prerequisite that the device be registered first in the course of reporting the serious incident. So that could happen spontaneously at any point after the date of application. There's no UDI labeling requirements, and there's no direct marketing requirements. So graphically, what this looks like is your certificates in the bottom left-hand corner have been in force, and maybe they won't expire. Maybe there's a 5-year term on them. And as of the date of application, they continue to have a valid certificate. So you met the first criteria. Now, it's very possible that your certificate might expire 1 year into this 4-year period or any time thereof. So it's a uniform type of expiration that occurs during this 4-year window. And again, if there's no changes then and your certificate is valid, you can continue, which is the second bar, placing those products on the market for up to 4 years. There is a 1-year window, which let me quickly cover, referred to as a sell-off window. So this is a 1 year where those products may already been released out of your control and now are in the logistics chain, supply chain. Maybe there's a distributor that holds them, or maybe they're on a shelf somewhere in a warehouse. They can continue to be used and put into service for an additional year. What I wanted to highlight is the top bar, and that's the 18-month period of time going from May 26, 2020 out to November 2021, where these particular devices need to be registered. And again, spontaneously inside that 18-month window. We're going to shift over to the other major group, those new devices that are placed on the market for the first time. This bucket would also include directive devices that have a significant change or an expired certificate, and it also includes those directive devices that don't have a directive certificate. What I mean by that are the self-certified class 1s. So there's not a notified body certificate associated with those. And it's clear that now they need to follow the medical device regulations. So the rule there is, again, an 18-month window where these devices can be registered. After that 18-month window closes, then the registration would have to take place before that product is placed on the market for the first time. And again, that caveat of a serious incident acting at any point in time causing a registration to occur. Now these products, the products that follow the MDR, they do have UDI labeling requirements that they must meet. And there's a schedule of 1 to 5 years based in class. And there's a subset of these devices that meet the reusable medical device criteria, and they need product marking, so a device directly or UDI directly marked on the product. That is a staggered 2 years. So let's take a look at that scenario on the timeline. Again, here's the date of application for those products that meet this MDR criteria. Here is that 18-month window that we looked at earlier out to November 2021, and spontaneous reporting as necessary. And then with UDI labels coming into place, the first high-risk device, Class 3, would be on May 26, 2021, followed by Class 2 A and Bs, 2023, Class 1s, 2025. And then staggered 2 years after that would be the direct marking as necessary. So I know this gets a little busy, but I staggered or placed these two timelines together, and you can see all the activity that needs to take place in this 18-month window. Our recommendation is you be proactive in this particular activity and make sure that you have means to submit data very quickly in the event of a 2-day turnaround. So you'll be able to register in 2 days if absolutely necessary, and then proactively work on your inventory to make sure that this doesn't become a fire drill and you don't get near the end of the 18-month and suddenly realize that you have thousands of devices to register. We're not going to go through this particular chart. That's the good news, but it is a summary of what we just talked about. It allows you to compare those particular groups on the left-hand side and the various attributes. Again, this is a summary slide that summarizes medical device timelines in blue, when UDI data must be reported, when UDI must be placed on label, and direct mark. So information there for you to look at. Now, the very big question that we get and ask all the time is, what about a delay? And there's a lot of rumblings. You'd see, and this becomes a political issue as well. Not only technology issue, are you going to make it, but there's political impacts. What happens if UDAMED is not ready on May 26th of next year, 2020? Well, in that particular case, the regulations actually had some provision for that scenario. They allowed the European Commission to continue to work on UDAMED, make sure the functionality was developed, tested, and ready to meet all the criteria of recording information and making it visible and so on. The regulation talks about a UDAMED ready notice, where the European Commission would finally come to the point. It may be months, 6 months, who knows, a year, after the date of application, when they finally publish this notice that says, hooray, we're finally done, we've done all the testing, UDAMED is now ready. After that announcement is a 6-month delay period, where basically the dust is able to settle, industry is able to understand the final shape and form and the specifications and how UDAMED was configured. After that 6-month period, the 18-month registration period that we just talked about earlier starts. So there is this period of time where after the notice, this registration period starts 6 months afterwards, and it goes out the total of 24 months after that notice. We see in the regulations and also in some of the medical device collaboration group releases that during this 18-month period, just like we had talked about earlier, if UDAMED was on time, if there is a need to report a serious incident, you need to do that spontaneously. Now, there's one other topic that we need to talk about before we go off this slide. There was some information published about one of the modules, not the UDI module inside UDAMED, but a vigilant module inside UDAMED that may not be ready as of the date of application. The significance of that is In the event it's not ready and it's delayed, just that module is delayed, then this activity of reporting a serious incident would not have a repository for that data to go into. So we're keeping a close eye on this particular activity. We'll see if Vigilant, if there's public notice that comes out confirming that Vigilant may be delayed. And again, whether it's months or another period of time, maybe it's just 1 month, multiple months. But this does have an impact on your scenario about reporting a serious incident. So just to be comprehensive and cover all the bases, it's good to know some of the things happening there. We'll keep an eye, and I'm sure you as well, will keep an eye on the European Commission announcements. I'm now going to switch over to the specifics of the UDI regulations inside MDR. So what is really required to comply with UDI? I have used a slide very similar to this for the FDA for years. When the European Union came out, I was able to make some minor changes, and interestingly, the concepts are very much the same. Adding a UDI that is composed of a device identifier and a production identifier on the label and package is the same. We already talked about the UDI presentation. Some devices qualifying and needing a direct mark. Now this is different. So a different repository, obviously. The data is submitted in an XML file, but it's not the XML file that FDA used. So the FDA used a third-party organization, a standards device organization referred to as Health Level 7, and created an SPL document, Structured Product Labeling document. European Union has created their own XML proprietary spec for submission of that data. And there's lots of attributes, so we'll talk more about that in a few moments. But they are submitted to UDAMED and made available to the public through UDAMED. We do expect some fields to be not available, but for the most part, the very same platform. Whereas the FDA had the GUDID, and they shuffled the data and copied it over to the National Library of Medicine Access GUDID, actually two different databases, second one being the public-facing one. The last major tenet of the UDI regulation has to do with reporting. So there's annual reports and post-marketing surveillance, nothing new there, but now UDI has to be included on the patient implant card. Some cases, a serial number, lot number needs to be included. So keep that in mind as you look through the regulations. It impacts a number of different areas. Just for your reference, a UDI looks like that number underneath the barcode, and the presentation in a linear barcode. I happen to use a GS1 example here, but the first 14 digits preceded by a parentheses 01 closed paren application identifier for a device, and then that is concatenated with a production identifier depending on the presence of those controls on the label itself. So there might be a manufacturing date, expiration date, lot serial number, that type of controls, and that's very much similar. Rules are a little bit different, but the presentation would be able to be easily understood. And in some cases, you can, if you elect to, you can use the very same GTA number for your FDA and European Union marketing. I have the next couple slides a comparison of some of the rules. The goals that you look at are basically the same that the FDA had and the European Union had. The number of data elements, and we'll take a look at this very shortly, the actual list, 64 versus 25 that is in the listed in the regulation, but you look at some of the released information in the data dictionary that came out, version 3 has like 102. They have a new concept of basic UDI. We'll take some time to look at that as well. We won't go through all the details on these slides, but you want to come back and do a comparison of these particular attributes from the FDA and EU. And something new is the economic operators, where the FDA called all the participants labelers. And this goes into some depth about the various rules about spacing and software as a medical device and so on. I'll let you do some homework there. We won't take the time to go into it at this point. John, maybe that'll be another presentation later on. Okay, if you don't mind, John, launching that second question, and then we'll keep on moving.
I just had to find the mute button. Sorry about that, but yeah, absolutely. Happy to explore that as a future topic. All right, so let's launch poll number 2. So let me launch this. Which best describes your preparation for EU UDI data submission to UDAMED? Select one or leave blank if not applicable. So we'll give folks a few moments to respond. The radio silence is sometimes deafening. So, all right, so we've got right about 70% response. So let's go ahead and close that. Let me share the results. So again, in case you cannot see this, 32% not started, 10% need help, 33% using internal resources, 15% using external resources, and 10% have submission plan and preparing EU UDI submission solution.
All right,
so
very good.
10, 33, 15, 10. All right, here we go.
All right, very good. Thank you. Thank you. It looks like we're getting started there. I'm happy to see industry alive and alert and making some progress. Let's move on. I want to move our discussion over to the actual data sets and answer the question, what data must actually be submitted to UDAMED? And I know this is an FDA list, but this is the comparison. We'll do a quick scan at this. Some of our clients have thought that maybe they'd be able to simply reuse this data set intact as it stands and send it to UDAMED. There's a number of categories here: identification of the product, information about the labeler, regulatory information, some safety information, packaging information, a lot of characteristics there, and production controls. Just keep those in mind with 64 total. And now we're going to take a look at the two-tier structure that the UDAMED will be collecting data. So we need to talk a little bit about a buddy, which is a nickname for basic UDI-DI, and that identifier is associated to a product model or a product family. And that family has some common attributes. And at this point in time, there's 36 common attributes that are shared by all the children in that family. So the actual devices that have this basic UDI-DI as the family name, they share all these characteristics. So there are some bits of information here. The version, date, number, and state have to do with the actual tracking the record. This basic UDI-DI is the key field to identify these particular records, information about the organization. We'll talk a little bit more about the single reference number. This is quite different than what you may have experienced with the FDA. FDA looked to an outside standard organization, in this case Dun & Bradstreet for DUNS numbers, to identify actual locations, physical locations of companies. European Union elected not to go along that route and decided to assign their own numbers. So we'll talk about how that gets assigned in a moment. And then there's information about the risk class and so on. But look at these characteristics. There's a huge number of characteristics here, much more granular than what the FDA was collecting. These are all at the product family. I'm going to move down to the next slide, which are the characteristics associated with the individual device in that family. So there's some common fields that we saw earlier. This record, again, has a version date, number, and state. The key field to identify these records is this UDI-DI. And note that there is an element, a data element in this record that points back to the family name, the basic UDI-DI. So this is how the linking is accomplished. And there's other categories here: device information, information about the product designer, packaging, regulatory, number characteristics, safety information, and so on. We'll take a look at a couple of these in a moment. But noteworthy is that those two data records, the 36 and 66, add up to 102, almost double what the FDA was collecting. You should be aware that if you are a system provider or a procedure pack provider, there's dedicated data sets for that particular record. And again, it's two-tiered. There's a family basic UDI-DI, buddy information, and then there is information about the actual device inside that family. Notified bodies and also authorized reps have been identified with owners of information inside UDAMED, and there's a lot of information about their activities, confirmation and identification by authorized rep for those particular devices that are imported into the European Union. I wanted to pick out a couple fields. Basic UDI is a really good example. It's a new concept. The FDA did not have this concept at all, and I'm sure it caught many in the industry by surprise. It's basically that group identifier for a group of medical devices. An individual child device will only have one parent, so it won't be part of two different families, won't be associated with two different buddies. And all the devices have those same common fields. Now, the medical device collaboration group rolled out some specifications about the format. It needs to be maximum 25 characters and include a check digit or a character. Both GS1 and HIBIC launched some early draft releases and had to revise them a little bit based on this information. The use of buddy is inside European Union UDAMED for documentation purposes. It's not to appear on the product family or on the product label at all. So this is not a replacement for the device identifier. It does not have a barcode or other representation. It's really just a additional identifier for the group, the family level. GS1 implemented a global model number to accommodate this specification from the EU. Again, it has they have 25 max characters. In this case, they have 2 check digits. Their spec needed to be updated. They normally release something in January, but then they had to go back and revise it. It's now version 19.2 to include this information. And their definition has 3 components that go into a buddy, a company prefix, a model reference number, and again, this noteworthy is able to be alphanumeric. So normally GT number would only have numbers in it, but this can be alphanumeric, and these 2 together can be up to 23 characters. Doesn't have to be that, but the max 23 characters. And then GS1 built a specification algorithm in on how to create the 2 check characters. And again, there's no barcode associated with that. Underneath that, I showed in parallel what a device identifier would look like. So there is a 14-digit G10 would have an indicator digit, company prefix, item reference number, and then at the end a single check digit, numeric check digit. And that is represented like typically like a GS1 128 barcode or GS1 data matrix or similar. And again, I'm only use GS1 as examples here. I understand it's not the only allowable standard. So to illustrate how this would work on your inventory, let's say you have a buddy at the very high level for forceps, and you make a product, that plastic forceps. So the buddy has an identifier, there's a device identifier, individual product, and it might have packaging levels, 3 forceps in a pouch, 2 pouches in a box, and each has their own identifiers changed by the indicator digit. You have a different product that's based on stainless steel, so it has a different item reference number. And again, maybe you have a stainless steel locking version. So I think you get the picture here. All of those are inside the buddy identifier. Quickly, let's move over to the approved issuing agencies. The first 3, if you've been working with the FDA, you'll recognize them, GS1, HIVIC, and ICC BBA. Noteworthy is the addition of a 4th, IFA, and I will not try to pronounce this German pharmacy production identifier system, but there's a PPN that this system accommodates, and some structure here on the right. It's, as I understand it, used pharmacy to identify medical products, including medical devices, and it was approved by the European Commission as the 4th issuing agency. So keep that in mind. The other thing that is noteworthy is in that data set a nomenclature difference between what the FDA did regarding medical device nomenclature. So FDA accommodates the actual GMDN code, the Global Medical Device Nomenclature Code, 5-numeric, or they offer an alternative, the FDA preferred term. The European Union does not accept either one of those. So now there's some mapping exercise that you as a manufacturer need to accomplish. There's some information that this would be available inside UDAMED. I suspect it'll be a one-on-one lookup, but the European Union selected, and again, I won't go there with the pronunciation, CND, which is an Italian national classification of medical devices. And this has been used, if you're selling into Italy, this is no surprise to you, but there's some information about the actual format of that. That could be quite a task to find the CND equivalent of your GMDN, depending on how much mapping is publicly available. I want to spend just a few moments on the implementation plan. There's 5 major steps that you go through: preparing the process, data, doing the actual submission, getting a labeling system in place, and making sure you're up to speed. Due to time, I'm going to walk through this very quickly, showing you that you can come back here and read some details about these major steps in implementing UDI. And again, we'll be glad to talk about your particular scenario. I did want to focus in on some of the actual steps for reporting the data. So there is a requirement in regulation that talks about, as of the date of application, you as a manufacturer need to assign a buddy and a DI to your products. So that's an internal activity. Nothing exposed publicly, but it gets you along the path. And then as you need to have submissions and engagement with the UDAMED, you need obviously to create an account. You'll register your company as one of the economic operators. I think most of the audience would probably be manufacturer. When that happens, it's pretty straightforward. You'll receive an SRN number from UDAMED. That number, along with tons of other data values, need to be collected and pulled together and to be honest with you, this is a single line item, number 4, but that is where most of your effort and work is going to take place. The actual submission, European Union talks about 3 different methods. You can manually enter the data values on their web interface. Their web interface also is expected to have an upload option where you can browse to an XML file. So if you have capability to build that, you're able to upload it. The other option is to have a machine-to-machine transfer of that XML file via what they call the data exchange. And that's actually the option that RETEC is pursuing. There's a couple different ways that exchange can be connected. You can build your system, buy or install a third-party system, or rent, basically subscribe to a third-party system. The last one is the one that actually RETEC pursues. And we had a webinar. You can go back to our website. We did some deep evaluation looking at the advantages and disadvantages of those 3 options. We covered a lot of material, and as a summary, we now understand the FDA at the US region, the European Union, international activity. We didn't dive into, but there is another parallel discussion about the commercial requirements for sharing your product information electronically. National Health Service of England is actually leading the charge there. There's another wave of downstream users like your payers, insurance, track and trace requirements, safety registries, and so on. The FDA is actually making a lot of progress in promoting those downstream users. We here at RETEC looked at those waves and realized there's not one uniform solution set, that there are many different data values. Rules are quite different as you go from region to region. Submission methods, the actual protocol and the messages is quite different and unique. And there's a lot of ongoing changes. So all of that would make a strong argument that you need to evaluate your UDI master data management approach. We here at RETEC, and just a quick commercial, we work with manufacturers. We build a software as a service type of a solution that pulls data in, processes it through a workflow, and then exports that data. And then you can target from that one source of data coming into our single source product, you can target downstream users, whether it be a regulatory, UDAMED, FDA GUDID, all these other regulators that are coming on board, or through the very same platform, you then would be able to connect out to any of the trading partners on the GS1 Global Data Synchronization Network. A couple different implementation options. We're able to connect up and use our system as the master data repository. Some of the more sophisticated companies that have their information in their internal master data management system, we're able to do a tight integration and just basically operate as a data hub connector out to those downstream channels. If you want more information, please connect. A lot of different options there. Go to our website. There's a knowledge center, LinkedIn, Twitter. Here's an email and phone numbers and so on. With that, I'd like to wrap up, John, and save the balance of the time for some Q&A. Are you able to open that up?
I am, absolutely. And again, thank you so much, Gary, and your team at RETEC. I know you put a lot of time, effort, and energy in this preparation for this, and really great information. So let's start with a question from Poe. And I know you mentioned a couple of these throughout the presentation, but Poe says, I have not dealt with UDI before. Where can I find a list of companies or recommended companies that can create the UDI for our company?
Well, there's actually a limited number of vendors. There's multiple vendors. I would point to our company, RETEC, to help you get some basic information. Even if you elect not to go with us, we share a lot of good background content with the public. just so they can become educated. And then you can obviously search on the web and find you know, a list of vendors. But part of the challenge, by the way, is just understanding this very new concept. Small companies don't have, in some cases, dedicated regulatory people to spend time doing the research, and we'll be glad to, you know, share that information. There's instructions, consultants out there that are able to provide some information as well. So if you were asking me directly, I would point you to our particular website for some basic information. Both the FDA and the European Commission have websites with a lot of their public information. So you'll see standards, specifications, guidance about all this type of information. But you know, sometimes it's gobbledygook. You know, it's a little hard to work through. So you might want to you know, engage a you know, a particular vendor or a consultant that's been working in the space, can interpret it and then make it, you know, real and make it relevant to your particular scenario. So there's many exceptions and so on that you may not be aware of, and you want to focus in on what is relevant to your product inventory. So let's leave it at that.
All
You
right.
have another one?
Well, yeah, and let me add to that. So Poe and others listening, I know Gary is being humble and modest, but I can speak firsthand experience. Many years ago when UDI was rolled out from FDA, I went to the guidances and the information on the FDA website, and Gary's right. It's a little bit challenging to follow, and it wasn't all that informative, but I found the resources from RETEC to be very informative. I know they've done a lot of webinars in the past that I'm sure you can find on their website. I know they've done one with Greenlight in the past that you can review just to give you some oversights. But they put a lot of really great content and information out. So even if you don't work with them, I would encourage you to take advantage of their resources. All right, so let's go to the next question. This comes from Gary. Gary asks, what is the best approach for submission of unstructured data like CER?
So there are some requirements to submit documents. There may be, you know, well, it could be a whole host of documents. We're waiting to see exactly how that is able to be received at the European Commission. So they need to go into UDAMED. We understand that. The question is whether or not it would be submitted XML through the data exchange that I was referring to earlier, or are these documents simply able to be browsed to and uploaded once you have an account inside UDAMED web interface? So we'll wait and see as to the level of RETEC support on these supporting documents. And some of it will be dictated on how easy or how hard it may be to actually submit that. So in concept, we are building a you know, high-speed machine-to-machine connector to UDAMED. So that is going to be shuffling XML data files, but putting another type of file in there, maybe it's a PDF content or whatever, is, you know, in concept, it'd be able to go down the same pathway, and RETEC would simply act as a conduit, you know, a messenger service. But again, we want to wait and see how this really fleshes out. So we're focusing in at this point really just on the data, because that is a hard requirement, and we know it's actually very difficult to you know, get all that data together and meet the requirements on time. So that's number one priority. There may be, like I said, other options, and we'll wait and see.
All right. So next question comes from Aditi, and folks, please accept my advanced apologies if I mispronounce your name. It's not my intent. But Aditi asks, is the expectation that all devices to be sold in the EU after May 26, 2020 will need to be registered in UDAMED? The US had a device risk-based implementation guide for GUDID entry, is that not the same for UDAMED?
Yeah, so that is a significant difference, and you can look at some of the policy. I'm going to scroll back up here while we're talking. Some of the differences from FDA to EU are that the FDA had a staggered approach for class 3 first, and then implantable and life-supporting, life-sustaining, and then class 2 a couple years later, and then class 1 originally in 2018, now pushed out to 2020. That is not the case for the European Union. They did not divide it out by class like that. So when we look at this timeline, all classes need to follow this timeline. So all devices that are continually placed on the market, whether they be a legacy and sit in this 4-year period, and maybe it's only certificate is good for 2 years into it, but at some point in time, all of them will hit the maximum 4 years and then need to be re-registered. They call it the equivalent product needs to be re-registered as an MDR and comply with those new standards. And there's a high level of rigor. There's a lot of specifications and evaluations that need to take place. So that is some of the impact of the MDR, where there's no grandfathering in, and all classes need to go at the same time.
Okay, so Gary, we're a little over the top of the hour. There's quite a few more questions. Do you have time to maybe answer a couple more?
Yes, I certainly can. I'll stay on the line, definitely.
All right, so folks, I know we're not going to get to all these questions today. Be sure to reach out to Gary and the team at ReadTech as well if we don't get to all of your questions. Like I said, they're a really great resource, and Gary and his team will be happy to help. So John's question is, what are the reporting and registering implications for Class 1 self-declared? I know you covered a little bit of that, but it might be good to revisit that.
Yeah, so the Class 1 self-declared would fall into this category because they don't have a certificate now, so they can't enjoy the provision of a legacy device. They need to meet the MDR regulations. So going through the technical specs and the technical documents, as I understand it, they're typically held in-house and not submitted. But what must occur for those Class 1s is at some point in time during this 18-month period, they will have to be registered. So that also, again, could collapse to a spontaneous type of registration in the event your Class 1 might have a serious event. So, yeah, I think what they're seeing is this 18-month period. Now, after that 18-month period, after November, let's say you release a Class 1 product, then spontaneous, before you actually place that product on the marketplace, it would need to be registered. So there's a special window in the beginning, but then the requirement is prior to releasing or placing a product on the marketplace, it needs to be registered. And then you also need to look down and see if there's any requirements for your label. So if it's prior to May 26, 2025, you do not technically have any UDI label requirements, but if it's the next day, then again, before you place that product on the market, you'll need to comply with the placing UDI on that Class 1 label. Another question there, John?
Yeah, so let's go to a question from Nadia. Nadia asks, do we need to translate product labels in 24 EU official languages? For example, product name, symbol descriptions, etc.
I have seen some translations for warnings, precautions, and so on, and also a lot of discussion about making sure that you make good use of the international symbols. Got to recognize, so it cuts down on that. But then having the information for use include all the necessary languages for the targeted regions. I don't claim to be the labeling expert on that translation issue. We do have some partners that work in that space. Off the top of my head, I might point you to Prism ID as one particular vendor. There are others that would be able to better answer that question about whether everything needs to be on that label. Now, there are national rules. I will mention this. There's member state rules that are in a place and kind of layer on top of the European Union rules. So what that means is that there may be some requirements at the national level that you need to meet for example, Germany or France, that are layered on top of the EU.
Okay, so Gary, do you mind fast forwarding on your presentation to your contact information? I know some folks are going to have some questions, and we'll make this the last question. So Trevor asked, the regulation allows an exemption from UDI, PI, and MRF for devices for retail sale. In these cases, what does this mean for the HRF? Does it require simply the standard lot number, or let me repeat that last part. Does it require simply the standard lot number / expiry date as currently?
Yeah, I think we want to go into a little bit more. Maybe you can contact me directly on that. It appeared to be an oversight, and maybe this is what he was referring to. There is a provision for those retail point of sale products that are used exclusively for retail, and it's for all classes, that they do not need to include a production identifier. And the way the wording is, it says it doesn't need to be included in the AIDC. So it doesn't need to be captured in that barcode. And for whatever reason, they explicitly mentioned the barcode, and they never, in concert, mentioned that it could also be eliminated from the human readable interpretation. So that's the HRI sort of thing. Now, the standards, let's just use GS1 as an example. GS1 says that the human readable must match the content that is coded in the barcode. So it needs to be one-to-one. So if you go back to the standard, if European Commission says a value does not need to be in the AIDC, by implication, it does not need to be in the human readable. If there's further discussion on that, why don't you reach out to me directly?